From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The time has come, and everyone should speak loudly and speak out in the name of justice against the Israeli machines of killing and destruction. The occupation forces have crossed all lines and broken all humanitarian and international laws and ethics.
As the Palestinian death toll tops 650 in Gaza, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas backs Hamas's call for an end to the economic blockade of the Gaza Strip as a condition for a ceasefire. We'll go to Gaza City to speak with Democracy Now's Sharif Abdel-Qaddous. Then 9 Jewish activists get arrested in New York protesting inside the offices of Friends of the IDF. That's Friends of the Israeli Defense Forces. Then we look at what happens when a commentator on MSNBC criticizes her own network's coverage of Gaza.
We are disgustingly biased when it comes to this issue. Look at how many airtime Netanyahu and his folks have on air on a daily basis. Andrea Mitchell and others. I never seen one Palestinian being interviewed on these same issues.
We'll speak with Palestinian journalist Rula Jebreal and then host a debate on U.S. media coverage between Ali Abu Nima of Electronic Intifada and J.J. Goldberg of the Jewish Daily Forward. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israel continues to bombard the Gaza Strip amidst talks over a ceasefire. Israeli military attacks today include the bombing of Gaza's Sol power plant and the heavy shelling of Khan Yunis, killing 6 people and leaving at least 20 wounded. The Palestinian death toll is near 650, including over 160 children. More than 4,000 Palestinians have been wounded. According to Gaza officials, 475 houses have been totally destroyed and over 26 homes have been partially damaged. Israel has also struck 46 schools, 56 mosques and 7 hospitals, they say. Meanwhile, 2 more Israeli soldiers have been killed, bringing the Israeli military death toll inside Gaza to 29. A farm worker from Thailand also died inside Israel after being hit by rocket fire from Gaza. Secretary of State John Kerry is in Israel today for talks with Israel and then the Palestinian Authority. On Tuesday, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas endorsed a Hamas call to condition a ceasefire on ending the 7-year blockade of the Gaza Strip. Speaking at the UN Human Rights Council, Navi Pillay, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, said there's a strong possibility Israel has committed war crimes in Gaza. Pillay cited Israel's deadly attack on residential homes in the Shujaia neighborhood and the shelling of the Al-Aqsa hospital. Her comments come one day after Amnesty International also called for Israel to be investigated for war crimes.
Mostly of them are civilians, and under them we have children, we have women. Yesterday, the Al-Qasha hospital was attacked with 4 people that were dead, dozens wounded. So there is a strong allegation of crime wars committed by Israel. In order to establish this war crime, we ask now for a strong international inquiry. This must be done. This has to be done in order to eventually transfer Israel in front of the International Criminal Court.
The Obama administration's continued to back Israel's assault on Gaza, saying it believes Israel's acting in self-defense. On Tuesday, President Obama was confronted by protesters along the route of his motorcade to attend fundraisers in San Francisco. The demonstrators held signs reading, "Stop the killing and save Gaza." We'll have more on Gaza after headlines. Syria's reportedly seen the deadliest 48-hour period of its 3-year civil war. The London-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says over 700 people were killed Thursday and Friday, more than those killed in the chemical attack on Ghouta nearly 1 year ago. Most of last week's dead were killed in heavy clashes between government forces and rebel fighters at the Shar gas field in central Syria. The observatory puts the overall death toll since March 2011 at 170,000, more than one-third civilian. Over 2.8 million people have been displaced in Syria. The coffins of passengers who died in the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 are being flown to the Netherlands today after being moved out of eastern Ukraine. The remains of around 200 of the 298 victims were finally transferred after being held up for days by pro-Russian rebels who are suspected of downing the plane. Top U.S. intelligence officials say they believe the targeting of the plane was a mistake. They also say Russia had no direct involvement, but have accused Moscow of, quote, creating the conditions for downing through the arming and training of separatist rebels. Russia's joined with other members of the United Nations Security Council to approve a measure calling for an international investigation. In breaking news, a Ukrainian military spokesperson says 2 Ukrainian fighter jets have been shot down. Ukraine has seen intense violence in recent weeks, with the U.S.-backed Kiev government launching major attacks on Russian-leaning southeastern areas. In Indonesia, Jakarta Governor Joko Widodo, known as Jokowi, has been declared the winner of this month's presidential election, defeating the U.S.-trained former Army General Prabowo Subianto with 53% of the vote. In a victory speech Tuesday, Jokowi called for national unity after a bitter presidential contest. The American journalist Alan Nairn has reported Indonesian forces linked to Prabowo tried to rig the vote in his favor. Prabowo lost by over 8.4 million votes, but is now refusing to concede. His advisors say they plan to challenge the election results at Indonesia's constitutional court. A pair of federal appeals courts has issued conflicting rulings on the Affordable Care Act. President Obama's signature health care law. On Tuesday, a panel on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals struck down insurance subsidies in the 36 states that only use federal exchanges. The court said subsidies approved by the law don't apply to the federal exchanges, just the state exchanges. If allowed to stand, the ruling would drastically hike premiums for over 4.5 million people and gut a provision at the heart of Obamacare. In a separate ruling, hours later, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Virginia upheld the subsidies. The differing rulings will likely mean Obamacare's fate returns to the Supreme Court. Congress remains at odds over how to address the influx of 57,000 migrant children fleeing violence and poverty in Central America. President Obama has requested $3.7 billion to cope with the crisis. Senate Democrats plan to introduce a measure today requesting $1 billion less than Obama wants, but Republicans have rejected that plan. A deal appears unlikely before Congress goes on recess at the end of July. Republicans have demanded increased border militarization, with Texas Governor Rick Perry deploying 1,000 National Guard troops to the border. On Tuesday, Secretary of Homeland Security Jed Johnson said the number of detained migrant children's actually dropping.
We're seeing the numbers of illegal migrants coming into the Rio Grande Valley sector drop over the last 4 to 6 weeks. We've seen the numbers of total apprehensions drop, and the numbers of apprehensions of unaccompanied children drop over the last 4 to 6 weeks. We're not declaring victory. This could be seasonal, but the numbers are dropping.
And the Supreme Court has granted Arizona's request to carry out an execution after a lower court put it on hold. The Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals had sided with death row prisoner John Wood, who argued Arizona must disclose its lethal injection methods and the source of the drugs involved. It was said to be the first time an appeals court delayed an execution because of drug secrecy. But on Tuesday, the Supreme Court overturned the court's ruling, setting the stage for Wood's planned execution later today. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Secretary of State John Kerry has arrived in Tel Aviv for talks with Israeli and Palestinian Authority leaders over a possible ceasefire as the death toll continues to rise in Gaza. About 650 Palestinians have now died in the 16-day Israeli offensive. The death toll includes over 160 children. A 7-year-old died this morning when an Israeli shell hit a cart pulled by a donkey. According to Gaza officials, 475 houses have been totally destroyed and over 2,600 homes have been partially damaged. Israel has also struck 46 schools, 56 mosques and 7 hospitals.
Meanwhile, 2 more Israeli soldiers have been killed, bringing the Israeli death toll inside Gaza to 29. A farm worker from Thailand also died inside Israel after being hit by rocket fire from Gaza. On Tuesday, U.S. and European airlines halted flights to Tel Aviv after a rocket strike landed about a mile from the airport. On the diplomatic front, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has backed calls by Hamas for an end to the economic blockade of the Gaza Strip as a condition for a ceasefire. We go now directly to Gaza City, where we're joined joined by Democracy Now! Correspondent Sharif Abdel-Quddus. Sharif, tell us where you have just come from.
Amy, I was just at the Gaza power plant, which was hit last night by the Israeli military at least 3 times with artillery shells. This is Gaza's only power plant. It provides about 30% of the electricity to the Gaza Strip, and it was severely damaged last night. It's not working right now, and they're looking to repair it. This comes as already Gaza is suffering a very severe electricity problem, with the vast majority of Gaza's residents only receiving about 4 hours a day of electricity. So this is adding to the growing humanitarian crisis that Gaza is facing. The Israeli military has declared 44% of the Gaza Strip as a military zone and warning people in those areas. So essentially pushing in from the border 3 kilometers. And this is a piece of territory that is at its widest 9 kilometers wide and at its narrowest 5 kilometers. So nearly half of the Gaza Strip now has been declared a military buffer zone, and this has caused massive displacement. We're seeing over 100,000 people being displaced, not just in UN schools, but in unfinished buildings, in other people's homes, in churches. A church the other day where some residents, some evacuees were, the graveyard was bombed by the Israeli military. This caused a woman inside to go into labor, and she gave birth inside the church. The Shifa hospital has become a makeshift refugee camp. There's many residents from Shijaiya, the neighborhood in eastern Gaza City that was razed by the Israeli military on Sunday in one of the bloodiest days of the conflict. I spoke to many people there. They've come essentially with nothing, and one of them actually showed me a text message that she received that night from an unknown number. It wasn't even a number, it was letters where it received from, and it was a text message in Arabic that said, you've never seen anything like this, and it was presumably a warning to residents from the Israeli military to Shijaiya residents. And you know, when we talk about these numbers of children dying and of the number of Palestinians dead and wounded, it's much easier to understand them by telling their stories. And today in Shifa Hospital, I was just standing there, and a 30-year-old father came with his 6-year-old mother up to me asking for help. They said that his wife had just given birth to co-joined twins. They're joined at the stomach. They share a heart and a liver, and they desperately needed to get out of Gaza to go to Israel or any other country to do surgery to split them and to separate them, and that one of the children would be sacrificed for the other. He told me the story, and he said, let's go see the children. I want to show them to you. And we walked into the neonatal ward, met the doctor, and the doctor looked at me and said to me in English, so the man wouldn't understand, that we're too late, that they had just died. And then he had to inform the father, who broke down in tears. So these are the kinds of stories that you hear. He's been trying to get the children out, his newborn twins out for the past few days, but everything's been closed. And you know, this is the kind of drama that you see every day under this brutal military assault. And also, just on another note, this morning, the Israeli military hacked into or took over Hamas's radio station Al-Aqsa. And so while we were driving, we heard these warnings that were a little bizarre of the Israeli military saying, "Oh, terrorists, you hear the sound of the plane overhead? You are the target." And then, "Oh, terrorists, best place to feel safe for you is in your grave." And this is part of the psychological warfare that is going on as well.
And Sharif, very quickly before we conclude, could you say what you think the prospects are for a ceasefire being reached, given what Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has said, backing Hamas, the Hamas position on lifting the economic blockade of the Gaza Strip as a condition?
Well, I think it's a very important development. Many Palestinians here were very pleased at the news, and it unites a single Palestinian front in its demands. And you know, this is, I think, a key thing. Again, like I said yesterday, whenever you talk about what Gazans are asking for, they're asking for a lifting of the siege, a lifting of this brutal blockade that affects every single aspect of life. When you talk about water, you talk about electricity, you talk talk about jobs, you talk about the right to work and the right to travel. All of those things existed before the war. The war has exacerbated these effects very severely. So, this is something that all Gazans are calling for, and I think Abbas is joining with Hamas as an important development in that.
Sharif, I want to thank you for being with us. Sharif Abdel-Quddus, stay safe, broadcasting from Gaza City. Democracy Now! Correspondent. His pieces are appearing in The Nation magazine. We will link to it at democracynow.org. Nermeen?
Protests in response to Israel's assault on Gaza have drawn hundreds and in some cases thousands around the world. Here in New York City on Tuesday, members of Jewish Voice for Peace and Jews Say No occupied the office of the Friends of the IDF. The non-profit group raises money in the United States to send to the Israeli military.
For about an hour, activists read the names of the more than 600 Palestinians killed and demanded the group stop fundraising for the Israeli military. 9 people were arrested when they refused to leave the premises. Others protested outside the office. Democracy Now! Was there and brings you some of their voices.
Find out why Jews are protesting Israel's war on Gaza. Take a leaflet.
My name is Rebecca Volkomerson. I'm the Executive Director of Jewish Voice for Peace, and we're here today in Golda Meir Plaza at the office of the Friends of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and we're planning to do an action. The groups Jews Say No and Jewish Voice for Peace, Jewish activists who are protesting against the war in Gaza, against this incredibly terrible assault on civilians, and protesting the fact that this organization right here is actually raising money for the Israeli Defense Forces, helping them, supporting the assault that they're making on Gazan women, children, and families. So we feel like it's really important, especially as Jews, to make the statement that this is not in our name and that the Jewish community is not behind this assault in the United States and that they need to stop doing this immediately.
No more money for Israel's crimes. Not another nickel. Not another dime.
My name is Dorothy Zellner. I'm a former civil rights worker. I worked with SNCC for 5 years in the Black Liberation Movement in the United States. Most of us have been to Israel and the West Bank and Gaza, if not once, many times, and we have seen for ourselves what the conditions are there. And it is totally unbearable to know that this country dares to even say they represent us and they speak for us. There's a sit-in going on right now up in the offices of the Friends of the IDF.
No, wait.
Sorry, no one can come in.
We're a group of American Jews. We're here.
I can't have you stay here. You're not here with an appointment. I asked that you wait outside.
We are here peacefully.
I know you are.
We are here to demand, as American Jews, that Friends of the IDF stop funding Israel's massacre of Palestinians living in Gaza. Over the past 2 weeks, 621 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed. We are here nonviolently to do a civil disobedience. We mourn all who are lost, and we are reading the names of those who the Friends of the IDF have helped funded the IDF to kill.
July 10th, the following people were killed. Asma Mahmoud Al-Hajj, age 22.
Asma Mahmoud Al-Hajj, age 22.
Was killed in a bombing in Khan Yunis that killed 8 members of the same family and wounded 16 other people. Mahmoud Lutfi Al-Hajj, age 58.
Mahmoud Lutfi Al-Hajj, age 58.
Khadr Al-Bashaliki, age 45.
Khadr Al-Bashaliki. Excuse me, the police are on their way. You have to wait outside.
It's a private property.
We are here now. No cameras.
My name is Maya Ettinger. I was raised by 2 Holocaust survivors, my mother and my grandmother. And in their name, I'm here today to oppose the dehumanization of Palestinians, to oppose collective punishment. These were the things that they suffered and that they taught me to fight on behalf of everyone, not just on behalf of Jews.
Zuha Hamad, age 25.
Zuha Hamad, age 25. On Wednesday, July 9th, these many Gazans were killed. Abdelhadi Jamaat al-Sufi, age 24.
Abdelhadi Jamaat al-Sufi, age 24.
He was killed in a bombing near the Rafah crossing.
Israel shall not drop bombs on Gaza, nor shall they come to its war no more.
Hey, look, you're going to wind up, if you don't leave, you're going to wind up getting charged with criminal trespass. So I would advise you, if you don't want to get arrested, to leave now.
We're here doing
Hatem Abu Salem, age 28.
Hatem Abu Salem, age 28.
Died in
Priscilla Reed. I'm here appalled by the crimes against humanity being committed by Israel that protests to the world that it's capable of hitting targets in a very precise way. If this is precision bombing, the world has never seen anything like it. We are repeating the names of the people who have been killed in Gaza. The proportion of very young children is appalling.
Mahmoud al-Zwaydi, age 2.
Naam Mahmoud al-Zwaydi, age 2.
Was killed in Beit Lahia. Bassem Mohammed Mahmoud Mahdi, age 22.
Bassem Mohammed Mahmoud Mahdi, age 22.
It looks like they're Mohammed Abdel. They have a bullhorn. When the police come in, we're going to tell them that we're here peacefully during civil disobedience, and that we're here peacefully. We're mourning all lives that are lost, but we're holding the Friends of the IDF accountable for helping to support the IDF to kill all these people in Gaza whose names we've been reciting for almost an hour and are still not through the list. And tell them that we're here peacefully. We will not resist arrest, but that we're not leaving.
Good afternoon, folks. I'm Inspector Winsky from the NYPD. You are trespassing on private property. I'm going to give you an opportunity to leave, and if you choose to leave, you can leave now. If not, you're going to be arrested. So anyone that wants to leave can leave now.
We are a peaceful Jewish people. We are singing for Gazan life.
9 members of the Jewish Voice for Peace and Jews Say No organizations were arrested Tuesday, occupying the offices of the Friends of the IDF in New York. Special thanks to Democracy Now! Producers Hani Massoud and Sam Alkoff, and to our fellows Anna Ozbek and Daniel Bagun for that report. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute. In My Heart, a song for peace performed by Israeli David Broza and Palestinian Wissam Murad. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermin Sheikh.
We turn now to the controversies around media coverage of the crisis here in the U.S. Over the weekend, NBC reversed its decision to remove veteran correspondent Ayman Mohyeldin from Gaza. Mohyeldin was removed shortly after he reported on witnessing Israel's killing of 4 boys on a Gaza beach. His reports gave voice to Palestinian victims and placed the siege in the wider context of Israeli occupation, drawing criticism from supporters of Israel's offensive. NBC's decision to remove one of its top reporters sparked a massive backlash on social media, with the hashtag #LetAymanReport becoming a trending topic on Twitter. Days later, NBC backed down and Ayman Mohyeldin resumed his reporting on Sunday. In a Twitter post, Mohyeldin acknowledged the social media campaign that demanded his return, saying, quote, "Thanks for all the support. Proud of NBC's continued commitment to cover the Palestinian side of the story."
On Monday, one of MSNBC's frequent contributors, Rula Jebreal, took to the network's airwaves to criticize the initial decision to remove Ayman and the broader exclusion of Palestinian voices. Jebreal was speaking on MSNBC's Ronan Farrow Daily.
We are ridiculous. We are disgustingly biased when it comes to this issue. Look at how many airtime Netanyahu and his folks have on air on a daily basis. Andrea Mitchell and others. I never seen one Palestinian being interviewed on these same issues.
Well, I'll push back on that a little. We've had Palestinian voices on
maybe for 30 seconds, and then you have 25 minutes for Bibi Netanyahu and half an hour for Naftali Bennett and many others. Listen, the Ayman Mohyeldin story. Let's talk about this. We are home and we can discuss this. Ayman Mohyeldin is covering the Palestinian sides, and we get upset. It's too pro-Palestinian. We don't like it. We push him back, and thanks for social media that brought him in. Let's talk about these
Point
issues
taken, but doesn't it reveal equally our thinking that we now have Ayman Mohyeldin on air, and I think there's been very fair and balanced
coverage. Thanks to social media, and thanks for the pushback from the public opinion. And I'm not saying that everybody's like this, but it's 1/10 is giving to the Palestinian voice and 99% to the Israeli voice, and that's why the public opinion is pro-Israeli, which is the opposite in the rest of the world.
Shortly after the interview, Jebreal tweeted, quote, "My forthcoming TV appearances have been cancelled. Is there a link between my expose and the cancellation?" On Tuesday night, she appeared on MSNBC's Chris Hayes.
We're joined now by Rula Jebreal to talk about what happened. Rula Jebreal is an author and political analyst who frequently appears on MSNBC. She worked for many years as a broadcast journalist in Italy, where she also covered the Middle East. She's the author of Miral, which was made into a film by Julian Schnabel. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you with us. Can you talk about what happened and the decision you made to speak out on your own network?
Well, I decided to speak on my own network because we are liberal Democrats, and part of the debate of any media in the liberal democratic landscape is to discuss our own flaws as well as others, not only Bridgegate, but also Mediagate, I would say, and media scandal regarding the bias covering of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And I looked at studies, and the studies that were made by many scholars, respected American scholars, Juan Col and others, who are referring to the covering of the media, how much airtime is given to the Israeli officials and how much airtime is given to the Palestinian official. And it's a U.S. landscape that is so biased. So, for example, in 2012, you had on CNN alone 45 Israeli officials interviewed versus 11 Palestinians. And when it comes to this conflict today, in 2014, you have 17 Israeli politicians, official interviewed, versus 1 Palestinian. So we're going backwards regarding this issue. And that forms and shapes the public opinion in America that then transfer and become political support unconditional to Israel, to a policy that is very destructive both to the Israelis and to American stands in the world and their credibility.
Were you the only Palestinian consultant or contributor on MSNBC?
Absolutely, yes.
So what happened after your appearance on Ronan Farrow, where you said what you said, criticizing their coverage?
I just received emails of cancellation, and I asked a question about whether these cancellations are related to what I said earlier. I never had any. Tried to call the producers, and nobody answered the phone. Then I tweeted what I tweeted, and immediately there was a social media uproar. I understood. Listen, I worked in Egypt. I was kicked out of the country because I interviewed Amr Suleiman, the head of Secret Service. I asked him about torturing. I interviewed Silvio Berlusconi in Italy. I'm accustomed with this. When I pushed Silvio Berlusconi on corruption and scandals, my TV show was shut down. I'm accustomed to this. I did not, with all honesty, expect this from us liberal media and us who are advocating going out saying we tell the truth and we cover this in an unbiased way. I did not expect that.
The alternate writer, Max Blumenthal, spoke to an anonymous NBC producer who, he said, described, quote, a top-down intimidation campaign aimed at presenting an Israeli-centric view of the attack on the Gaza Strip, unquote. In his piece for Alternate, Blumenthal wrote, quote, the NBC producer told me that MSNBC President Phil Griffin and NBC executives are micromanaging coverage of the crisis, closely monitoring contributors' social media accounts and engaging in a, quote, witch hunt against anyone who strays from the official line, Blumenthal wrote. The producer told Blumenthal, quote, loyalties are now being openly questioned. Did you have any experience of that, Rula? How long were you a contributor at MSNBC?
I've been there for 2 years, and I've been there for 2 years. And I have to say, I was talking about the American landscape, not only MSNBC, which has been actually a little bit better than others. But I never experienced anything like this. I mean, I understood doing what I did in Egypt would lead me to be kicked out of the country. I understood in Italy, where Berlusconi controlled most of the media. I was shocked because most of my friends in the Middle East would tell me, you know, you will have an issue in America. And I always thought, no way. We're truth tellers, we're fact checkers, we're people that actually cover both sides. This is what America stand for. And I hope that MSNBC and other networks will actually revise their policies and will have more voices. It doesn't have to be me. It's not about me. We have a media scandal that we need to expose. We are responsible of these failing policies in Gaza and in Israel.
Had you tried to raise this before in the 2 years that you were a contributor?
Privately, I raised it with so many people in the inside. I've been pitching myself to talk about these issues on many shows. And I've been privately meeting with producer and others, and I told them, I said, listen, you have an issue there. Our credibility here at stake. We can't talk about Bridgegate for 6 months, and then when it comes to this, we duck our heads, and we decide to be exactly like the other networks. We can be different. We can be much more bolder, and we can be aggressive. And maybe the rates are this way because of this. I think most of them were agreeing privately with me, but then when it comes to what goes on air, I don't think they didn't have any power.
Now, you did go on Chris Hayes last night.
Absolutely. Chris Hayes contacted me late in the afternoon.
And he's on MSNBC.
And he's on MSNBC. Of course, we disagreed, but, you know, in the media, we can't agree to disagree. We have Joe Scarborough criticizing over and over, and he's fine, and he's okay. But one thing is to criticize certain things, but is this a hot issue that nobody can touch? Is this what America is becoming about?
So did you lose your job as a contributor?
I have no idea. I still don't know. My contract is up, and we're negotiating still.
And following your appearance on the show, you said one of the things that you hoped your comments would precipitate would be a national debate on the question of Israel-Palestine and how it's covered. What kind of shape do you think that debate would take? And if it were up to you, what kinds of issues should be raised more frequently in the mainstream media on this particular issue?
I think what we need to ask, are we really guaranteeing by supporting unconditionally this Israeli government, right-wing government, are we really helping Israel being more secure in the long term and ultimately American interest and stand in the world? Is that what's happening? And look, this policy with Gaza has been failing for the last 8 years. We had 6 bombardments in the last 8 years, and this did not topple Hamas and did not weaken Hamas. Actually, it empowered more and more Hamas. And martyrs like myself. And for me, Hamas is the ultimate liability for the Palestinian people. But this did not empower moderates. Moderates has been telling Israel over and over, we want a peace deal. We will agree on most conditions that you want. And as Gideon Levy said, in this same venue, the problem with our policy that we want to keep the status quo, that means military occupation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Gaza under siege. And we want, and what we are doing in the media, we're portraying actually a false image where what's happening in Israel, and if you ask anybody, whether in New York, in D.C., in other places, what do you think is happening? They will tell you, oh, well, Israel was minding its own business. The Palestinians start shooting missiles out of the blue. This is not the reality. This is not what's going on. And the context of this is what leading the public opinion to support unconditionally Israel. And politicians will do what's popular, not what's right. We need to do what's right. We in the media have a mission, whether it's MSNBC, Democracy Now!, CNN, we have a mission. We're truth tellers, and we can shape public opinion to protect public interest.
Rula, you have a fascinating story yourself, which you wrote about in your book, Miral, which was made into a film. Can you talk about where you were born and your own life story?
Look, I was born in Haifa. I am an Arab Israeli. I'm a holder of an Israeli citizen. I have my family lived all of their lives in East Jerusalem. I was raised in an orphanage. My family is both Muslims and Christians. I am married to a Jewish man, and I really believe in two-state solutions. A year ago, I discovered that I have a Jewish sister because my mother, that died when I was 5 years old, actually had a relationship, and I discovered a year ago that I have a Jewish sister that is tweeting today. And these days, killing Arabs is a value. This is the reality that I live in. And I have to be truthful because of what I've seen in the Middle East and because of what I witnessed, whether it's in refugee camps, under military occupation, under siege. I've seen how pain, grief, and when you keep 60% of the population that go almost hungry to bed and 90% without clean water, the only thing that can rise is extremism. And the solution to this is not to bombard them all together in one place. The solution to this is actually lifting the siege, empowering them financially, and let them themselves create a moderate leadership that eventually can take over. We didn't manage to topple Hamas, and this is facts. We are failing in our strategy in how to contain extremists. Hamas was dead politically. We will manage with this war actually to revive Hamas and its power and its grip on the Palestinian cause.
How did you end up going from Haifa, growing up in an orphanage, to becoming a broadcaster in Italy?
Simply, when I was 17 and a half, I won a scholarship from the Italian government. I went to Italy. I studied I studied there. I attended college. I became the first anchorwoman in the Italian television, first foreign anchorwoman, black anchorwoman in the Italian television. I was attacked by the right, especially during the Iraqi war, because I challenged their views on the Iraqi war. When I visited Iraq, it was clear to me that there is no way that a military solution will be met with cheering, and it was clear to me that the country would be divided immediately and the Shiites will take over. So I wrote about this. I was challenged by the right-wing government in Italy on these views. I was even called the N-word on air by one of the ministers of Silvio Berlusconi, who actually was pushed to resign 3 days after because of the uproar of the media. Because of that. Then I worked for so many years in Italy. I was a reporter. I read the news. And then I decided to go to my own world. I went to Egypt. I worked there for 3 months. I was on-air journalist. I broadcast a TV show until I started asking the wrong question, a tough question to the establishment. After that, I was off-air, kicked out of the country. And I hope to find a platform somewhere.
And you just talked about your work in Italy. How would you say the reporting in Europe on Israel-Palestine compares to what you've seen since you've come to the U.S.?
Day and night, day and night. And simply because of the images that reporters bring from the ground and are allowed to show on air. Here, we have a problem with what we show. The tipping point for me is when people like Rihanna and Selena Gomez are not even celebrities allowed to sympathize with the people that are dying, not with Hamas. When they wrote their Twitter and saying, we pray for peace in Gaza and we sympathize with the victims, and everybody backlashed on them, and when even John Kerry was scared when his microphone was open on Fox, and then he had to actually walk back that line. That shows you something. Everybody's scared when it comes to these issues. It's time that we in the media have the courage to... We expose so many wrongdoing from our own government here and their wrongdoing abroad. It's time to it's time really to do a service, not a disservice to our audience and to our interest in the world. And also to the many Israeli people and Jewish people, as you showed in your network, that are today calling on Israel to stop their policies.
Rula, we want to thank you for being with us. Rula Jebreal, author, political analyst, frequently appears on MSNBC. She worked for many years as a broadcast journalist in Italy, where she also covered the Middle East, is the author of Miral, which was also made into a film. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, a debate on the U.S. media coverage of the Israel-Gaza conflict. Stay with us. Asfa Asfar, the song, the Trio Gibran. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermin Sheikh.
We turn now to a debate on the U.S. media's coverage of the Israel-Gaza conflict. 2 days after Israel launched its offensive on the Gaza Strip, the New York Times drew widespread attention on social media when it ran a story with the headline, quote, "Missile at Beachside Gaza Cafe finds patrons poised for World Cup." One of our next guests, Ali Abunimah, tweeted in response to the Times, quote, "Israeli missile stops by Gaza Cafe for a drink and dialogue with its Palestinian friends." The Times later changed their headline to, quote, "Israeli missile kills 8 Palestinians at a beachside Gaza cafe."
To discuss this headline and much more, Ali Abunimah joins us from Chicago. He's the co-founder of the website The Electronic Intifada and author of the new book, The Battle for Justice in Palestine. And here in our New York studio, we're joined by J.J. Goldberg. He's the editor-at-large and columnist at the newspaper The Jewish Daily Forward. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Ali, let's start with that headline, the original headline in the New York Times that we just read. Missile at beachside Gaza cafe finds patrons poised for World Cup. Can you take it from there? Explain what happened in that situation.
Well, it's very simple. The New York Times headline makes it sound like the Israeli missile stopped by the cafe for a friendly chat. But what the missile actually did was blew to pieces a number of people who had gone to the beach to try to escape from the horror of Israel's pogrom in the rest of Gaza and to watch a World Cup match like billions of people around the world. And they died there. That's what happened. But that's not what you would get from the New York Times headline. And I think that the media are failing to convey the enormity of what's happening to people in Gaza. This morning I heard from my friend Rifat al-Ara'ir. He's the editor of the wonderful book of short stories by Gaza writers called Gaza Writes Back. He's outside Gaza now, studying, separated from his family, which is even worse than being in Gaza for people whose families are there. This morning he lost his best friend in Israel's pogrom in Shuja'iyah, his best friend Osama, who happens to also be his wife's brother. And his family, his wife's family, have lost 8 people in the last 5 days. This catastrophe, this mass destruction in Gaza, the randomness of the slaughter and the killing, is not being conveyed. We have to hide from it in this country because if we reveal the full truth about the horrifying pogrom that Israel is carrying out, a lot of people won't be able to handle it.
J.J. Goldberg, can you first respond to that headline, which the Times then changed to reflect that 8 people had been killed, and then talk about the larger coverage as you see it?
Well, in general, I find headlines in newspapers to be awful. Having started as a headline writer, you're trying to be cute and get people to read the article. And the headline writer probably assumed that when they said missile, the readers would understand that it was going to kill somebody. But you don't act cute when you're talking about people dying. So Ali was right to call attention to it. I haven't heard any mention of the fact that Israel is being bombarded. Now, Israelis aren't dying because Israel has a good missile defense system. Gaza does not. I don't think Israel is going to apologize for having a good missile defense system. Israel made it clear when the rockets stop coming from Gaza, we will stop bombing Gaza. Israel accepted an Egyptian ceasefire. The Hamas, as you briefly mentioned, did not and does not. So if it's really so awful that your people are being killed, accept the ceasefire and then talk about the conditions of the ceasefire. The things you want ought to come up. Ali said that you're not allowed to mention the deaths. I've been watching a lot of television, reading a lot of newspapers. The deaths, the suffering of the people in Gaza is pretty much all that's covered here in the last few weeks. partly because of the way news works in America. If it bleeds, it leads. We've been inured by local news to bang, bang, and shoot, shoot. So the fact that people are dying in Gaza, which is awful, it's awful, but that's the whole story here. How many people are dying, and then there's the fact that there's a politics behind it, that there is a war going on in which one side wants to destroy the other side and the other side doesn't want to be destroyed, that's hardly covered at all.
Ali Abunimah.
Yeah. I mean, JJ has offered us all of the propagandistic talking points that don't stand up to scrutiny, and that's one of the points of the media coverage. The only side that is being destroyed now is Palestine. We're witnessing the destruction of Palestine in Gaza, in the West Bank, in the Naqab, in the Negev, where Bedouins are being ethnically cleansed. The destruction of Palestine has been going on for almost 70 years, and J.J. Goldberg has the chutzpah to say that people in Gaza who are fighting for their survival and their existence are trying to destroy Israel. This is the kind of Orwellian propaganda that is coming from the Israeli government and its apologists in the media here. Let's talk about the false claims that J.J. Goldberg made about the ceasefire in Hamas. You know, you can only make those claims, J.J., if you ignore the fact that after the November 2012 ceasefire, not one rocket came out of Gaza for 3 months. Who did violate the ceasefire, J.J.? It was Israel. It bombed Gaza dozens of times. It killed and injured dozens of people. It fired on farmers and fishermen. Even the New York Times had to admit Israel's frequent ceasefire violations. JJ, the answer, if you want to stop rockets, is time-tested and easy. Israel can stop attacking and killing people in Gaza. It can lift the siege. Also, let's talk about, you know, it's not just having Palestinians bleed on television that's the point of coverage. Where are the Palestinian voices? Yesterday, the Electronic Intifada published a statement by 91 civil society leaders in Gaza, people from the Red Crescent, from the universities, from the media, Supreme Court judges, 91 members of civil society, and they said, we do not want a ceasefire without justice because going back to the status quo is a living death. The choice we're being given is between being blown to bits or dying slowly without the world listening. You know, when there's a ceasefire, J.J. Goldberg isn't agitating in the nation, in the forward, for an end to the siege. What we have is this liberal Zionist navel-gazing about how to preserve Israel as a so-called Jewish and democratic state. Enough Palestinian babies have been blown to pieces for this insanity. Enough of lecturing Palestinians that their resistance is illegitimate or futile.
Well,
Palestine is being destroyed, JJ. We're witnessing the destruction of Palestine, and you have the chutzpah to claim that Israel is in danger.
Well, what about this point that Ali raises of the siege, that what Mahmoud Abbas has also said it supports Hamas in, is not accepting a ceasefire until the siege is lifted as well?
Right. Mahmoud Abbas came around to that after finding during his meetings in Qatar, which were apparently very tense, that he wasn't going to get Khalid Mashal to accept the Egyptian version of the ceasefire, which is first stop the killing and then talk. And since
Why can't Israel stop the killing now, JJ? Why does Israel have to slaughter 60 or 70 people a day? Why don't you tell Israel to cease the bombing and the killing now? Why are you telling Palestinians
you obviously
to stop
haven't read a
defending themselves?
Well, should I stay here or leave?
J.J. Goldberg, why don't you explain?
Should I stay here?
You should stay here and explain what is it that you write? What is it you say in the forward?
I have been writing for years that Israel is doing a great disservice to itself and to the Palestinians by resisting
It's a pogrom, not a disservice. Use the correct words, JJ.
Oh, well,
it's a pogrom.
It's not a pogrom, and it's not chutzpah, and the word is chutzpah.
Keep going.
And it's Hamas, not Hamas.
Go ahead, JJ. Explain this issue of the siege. Has the Forward, have you supported a lifting of the siege?
Yes. Yes. The siege is extremely counterproductive. It's cruel, and it's not working in bringing down the Hamas government.
And explain what the siege is.
The siege is a closure of the, it's essentially a collective punishment of the people in Gaza because they are ruled by Hamas, and Hamas is dedicated to the unmaking of the Israeli state. As Rula said before, Hamas is not working for coexistence between Israel and Palestine. Hamas came into power in Gaza by murdering leaders of Fatah, taking over in a coup d'etat, and turning Gaza into an armed state in order to attack Israel. That's what's been going on. Israel responded with an extremely counterproductive collective punishment. Now, it's been mentioned that Gaza doesn't have Israel bombed its only electrical power plant, which supplied 30% of its electricity. The other 70% was supplied by Israel. The Israeli power supply to Gaza was shut down by Hamas rockets a week ago, and the Israeli electrical workers are afraid to go out and fix the cables because of Hamas rockets. I don't know where else to go.
JJ, could I ask you also to respond to the point that Ali Abunimah raised about who violated the ceasefire? In one of your recent pieces, you wrote that the last 7 years have been the most tranquil in Israel's history, that is, prior to what happened on July 8th. Terror attacks are a fraction of the level during the nightmare Intifada years, just 6 deaths in all of 2013. Right. So could you address specifically the ceasefire, who violated it?
The ceasefire, well, first of all, it's important to know that Hamas did observe the ceasefire from November 2012, after the Pillar of Defense, I think they called it, until this outbreak. There were rockets being fired by other groups operating out of Gaza. Hamas was trying to enforce the ceasefire. It did a decent job of it, but it wasn't perfect. And when there were rockets, Israel went and bombed the rocket squads. And sometimes when Israel bombs the rocket squads, it hits
hospitals,
civilians.
Mosques, schools, children, everything. It hits everything.
Ali Abunimah, this issue of having a ceasefire and then negotiating the end of the siege.
Well, I mean, if J.J. Goldberg says that the siege is cruel and it's collective punishment, all of which is true, it's a violation of international humanitarian law. It's, in fact, a war crime to deprive people under occupation of their basic needs. Then why not tell Israel, lift the siege and then talk? Why is the onus always on the occupied, the dispossessed, the refugees, to prove their good behavior to the ghetto masters?
Well, let's just put that point to J.J. Goldberg.
Keep going.
No. J.J., why don't you respond?
I haven't finished my point.
No, Ali, you can make a second point after, but let's just address that one point.
Well, first of all, he's right that depriving the occupied people of their basic needs is a war crime. They haven't been deprived of their basic needs. They've been kept poor, but they haven't been starved.
Have you been to Gaza, J.J.?
No, I would be shot if I went to Gaza.
That's untrue. There are many international people in Gaza now who are not being shot. They're actually bearing witness, and they're under the bombing with Palestinians. So stop inciting against Palestinians by these false claims that, you know, Palestinians are such wild monsters that if they see a Jew, they shoot them automatically. This is libel. This is libelous, JJ, and it's a libel that contributes to the bloodshed because it further dehumanizes Palestinians.
Let me go to another headline as we talk about media criticism. This was the Washington Post headline on Sunday's front page. It was in large letters. It said, 2 Israeli soldiers killed in Gaza clash. And then the sub-headline says in smaller text, death toll tops 330 as Hamas militants step up attacks. So, again, the large headline says 2 Israeli soldiers die. And in the smaller headline, it says 330 people die as Hamas steps up attacks, indicating perhaps it was Hamas who had killed them, let alone even if you thought it was 330 Palestinians, it was in the sub-headline. The next day, the Baltimore Sun ran this headline with a story by a McClatchy reporter. Sharp rise in Gaza deaths. 13 Israeli soldiers, 70 others killed. Kerry to seek end to fighting. 13 Israeli soldiers, 70 others killed. Your thoughts on that, J.J. Goldberg?
I would have to see the Post headlines from day to day. If all of their headlines were about Israeli soldiers being killed, then I would say that's outrageous. But if what I've seen is a lot of coverage, and headline writers need to break up the monotony. Now, there's a certain monotony to massacre when it happens day after day.
J.J. Goldberg, I want to turn to another point that you made in your most recent piece, which is that the momentum turned against Israel only on Sunday following what happened in Shujaia, that international support for Israel diminished. Could you say a little about how you think that was reflected in media coverage, what the media coverage was like before, when there was more support for Israel's military assault on Gaza, and what happened after Sunday? In the media coverage?
The media coverage has been fairly straight. It's been reporting from Gaza on what's going on.
Before and after.
Before and after. And when there's a lot more people killed, it looks a lot worse. It is a lot worse. And so the demonstrations and the rallies against Israel in Europe and America have increased. You begin to see European leaders beginning to distance themselves. I think I wrote the wind shifted, and I've written in a couple of tweets and so on that Israel jumped the shark. It went overboard. It went a step beyond what it had been doing. The ground campaign essentially was a declaration of war on the Palestinian people.
Ali Abunimah, J.J. Goldberg said there's a monotony to massacre.
I'm still trying to get my head around that phrase, frankly, Amy. Just the callousness of it, the inability to absorb the enormity of the catastrophe. Someone calculated that if Gaza were the United States in terms of population, we're talking about 80, 90,000 dead in the space of a few days. There isn't a single family in Gaza that hasn't lost people. We're talking about entire families wiped out. At the beginning, J.J. Goldberg was whining that there isn't enough coverage of Israel being bombarded, as if there's any comparison whatsoever, not just to what Israel is doing to Gaza now, but to what Israel has been doing to Gaza for 8 years, what Israel has been doing to Gaza since 1967, what Palestinians have been going through for decades, being forced off their land, being killed. I mean, we're not paying attention even to the West Bank. All eyes are on Gaza, but people are being killed in the West Bank. Land is being taken in the West Bank. The destruction of Palestine continues so that people like JJ can sit in New York and pontificate about how American Jews in North America need a spare country so that they can feel safe. The destruction of Palestine has to end.
JJ Goldberg, last 15 seconds.
I hardly know what to say.
Call it a disservice, JJ, why don't you?
Well, we're going to have to leave it there.
We're going to have to leave it there.
J.J. Goldberg, editor-at-large of the Jewish Forward, the Jewish Daily Forward, his most recent article, As Gaza Toll Rises, so will pressure on Israel. And Ali Abunimah, the co-founder of the website The Electronic Intifada, author of the new book, The Battle for Justice in Palestine. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Has job openings. Check our website. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Thanks for joining us.